Steven Universe has a ton of sick designs, but there's none as sick as Malachite. From the moment this fusion begins to form, this feeling of inhumanity just floods the scene, a creature crawling that ought to walk. The palette of her entrance back in Jailbreak just enhances this nauseating debut, with the greens of the character feeling alien to everything on the pink planet she's found herself suddenly existing on. Everything other than the flames ravaging the ground. Malachite is a being solely meant to experience and cause pain and suffering, and that's something you don't even need to unmute your television to begin to sense. Let's back up a bit and talk about the parts that make up this video's title juncture. The first of the pair we're introduced to is Lapis Lazuli, who spends her pre-fusion episodes either describing a not-so-great time to be the character, or having a not-so-great time in the present. To quickly summarize the Lapis trauma though, her whole deal is that everybody just uses her as a tool, and she suffers accordingly. She's forced to fight in a war she doesn't want to be a part of, forced to consciously power a mirror for and by those unaware of her consciousness, and then forced, yet again, to fight in a war she doesn't want to fight in. Throughout the latter half of this cycle, and the part that we actually see on screen, the character has made the decision to attach herself to the one person who has shown her any sort of kindness, risking everything to try and protect Steven. However, in the moments before the creation of Malachite, the character has just failed in that mission, being put in the most literal of prisons, while, just as usual, the plot occurs elsewhere. That is not quite the case for Jasper. See, while Lapis spent thousands of years trapped with only her thoughts, her eventual fusion partner remained in the thick of it constantly, watching as her home and her diamond were taken by a rebel force she doesn't understand. By the time that we actually meet Jasper at the end of the return, she's already filled with the hatred that Malachite will personify. She even already has the color palette down. She's also already spewing much of the psychology that the audience will quickly begin to associate with the character, mainly how she's nearly always defined by her respect for power. Even when face to face with who she believes to be Rose Quartz, the one responsible for everything that Jasper is trying to avenge, she just can't stop herself from first complimenting her tactics of war. Similarly, one of the first Jasper opinions we find ourselves forcibly aware of is her disdain for fusion, although that one will shift pretty quickly after she gets her ass kicked by one. So now you're caught up to the moment this video started with. A character desperate for power seeing an opportunity to grab it, and a character desperate for revenge seeing one as well. You can even watch this thought process play out within this scene as well, as Lapis seems disgusted by even just the idea of fusing with Jasper, likely holding the same homeworld disdain for the practice, right up until the point where she hears the word revenge. And thus, the pair engage in perhaps the most chilling sequence of the series, spawning a creature that doesn't belong where eyes can see, and accordingly so, banishing themselves to the bottom of the ocean. Something worth noting for the rest of this video is that while I will attempt to be equally considerate of both halves of this fusion, the show certainly isn't. Lapis Lazuli will ultimately get about 23 speaking appearances in this series, while Jasper won't come especially close to hitting half that total. And while some of that is inflated by the fact that she spends a good chunk of the show rooming with Peridot, and Jasper spends a good chunk of the show living in a literal bubble, we just get considerably more of the former's perspective. This is something that is perhaps at its most prevalent in the only Malachite episode where the fusion exists from start to finish, Chillatide. Of course, things would be a bit too easy if we actually got to just see the fusion in this one, so instead we interact with Jasper and Lapis through Steven's dreams, in what I think is supposed to be a visual interpretation of Malachite's inner turmoil, but getting bogged down in the specifics here would be missing quite a beautiful forest for some pretty uninteresting trees. Anyway, while there isn't a ton of dialogue in this one between Lapis and Steven, and Jasper literally gets two distinct words out, what we do get is quite dense. For starters, I think this episode makes it pretty clear that while Steven and the gang view finding Malachite as rescuing Lapis, she is the only one responsible for this current arrangement, even begging Steven to not interfere. Going back to Jailbreak for a moment, although Lapis will position her decision here as being done for Steven's sake, it's more than clear that she's only doing this for herself. In the moments leading up to the fusion, all Lapis would have needed to do is work with the crystal gems, or even just step aside, and Jasper would have been as good as bubbled. Instead, though, Lapis makes the decision to inflict some of the pain she's experienced onto somebody else, giving Jasper partial control of this massively powerful beast in the process. It's this choice that's undoubtedly flawed and selfish, but the show won't quite fully acknowledge that for another season or two. Before then, though, we see Lapis make a different decision, and one that sets up the next appearance of the character. While before this moment, this fusion was pretty clearly being controlled by each individual component, something symbolized both by the two characters taking turns talking in Jailbreak and by the drowning visuals here, this episode ends with the two characters becoming one. Lapis has spent so much energy trying to take control of this relationship, so much energy trying to get what she needs out of what she hates, that she's lost herself within it. And just how Garnet seems to operate as a single unit, one bonded by love, Malachite has become bonded by hate, and it's time to share that hatred with others. This brings us to Watermelon Island, which is a weird episode to talk about for the sake of this video. On one hand, it is certainly the quarter hour with the most Malachite in it, featuring one of the best fights in the series as the fusion establishes herself as the most powerful being to physically appear in the show yet, but I'm not entirely sure we really learn much about the character. If anything, it mostly just features a damnation of this idea that this relationship was ever going to let either component fully attain what they want. Lapis was never going to be able to keep Jasper trapped for the thousands of years that she was, and Jasper was never going to be able to attain the type of long-term power that Garnet has. For Malachite, this was the only way things could have ever ended, brutally and painfully for those within and outside of the fusion. But while this may technically be the finale of the being herself, it's certainly not the end for what Malachite represents. Lapis spends the first two episodes away from Jasper, reacclimating to say the least. Eventually, though, she decides to make the best of being on Earth, joining in on the shenanigans that usually fill the show, and just generally settling into borderline comedic relief, for as long as she can. While Alone at Sea is an episode that doesn't feature Malachite, as that's kind of the point, it is certainly all about her. Even before Jasper shows up, Lapis and Siva's boat adventure is really all about how Lapis feels she's a bad person, feels she deserves bad things to happen to her, and feels like Jasper is the only one who she deserves to be around. There's a lot of really clever dialogue here that contributes to this being one of my favorites from the show, with this fishing metaphor for Lapis using Jasper's desire for power against her getting me every time.
But why would a fish ever bite a hook?
You gotta bait it. Put something on it you know it wants.
But there's really only one piece of dialogue here, one moment that every discussion of this episode has to center on.
You don't have to be with Jasper.
That's not it. I miss her.
After months trapped in a power struggle at the bottom of the ocean, spending each and every moment in constant warfare, all Lapis wants is that feeling back. That complete knowledge of purpose, knowledge of what each day is going to look like. She may have been miserable with Malachite, but she's definitely miserable now. Just to state the obvious, since I haven't yet in this video, just like every fusion, Malachite is a representative of a type of relationship. This one being, just like its namesake gem when submerged in water, toxic. Alone at Sea really spends a good chunk of its runtime bouncing off this, with the reason for the little Lappy's maiden voyage ostensibly being to allow Lapis to regain her love of the ocean after her previous relationship ruined it for her, having some obvious parallels, but it's what the show does after this declaration from Lapis that makes SU's discussion of this topic really enthralling. After Lapis admits that she misses Jasper and that she's always thinking about what they had together, the show gives her an opportunity to get it back. And while the majority of Steven Universe's most tense scenes are tense in spite of the fact that the ending is already known, as nobody's gonna die and characters aren't gonna stay mad at each other forever, Jasper asking for Lapis's hand in fusion feels different. Lapis has already chosen to leave the show at the end of an episode, and will do so again before the series is over. Even if it is pretty clear that Lapis isn't going to reform Malachite just to kill Steven or whatever Jasper wants to do, she never wanted the pair to emerge in the first place. So the idea that she could want to trap Jasper for a second time feels realistic. You can even see the character weigh all of these options, choosing to hear Jasper out rather than just ending this interaction early. The dialogue during this section also continues to hammer at the toxic relationship metaphor here, with Jasper telling Lapis that there's nobody else out there for her and that this time she promises things will go differently. And with an entire episode building up a hypothetical reason to say yes, and an environment prime for a moody reversal of loyalty, Lapis chooses freedom. Freedom from her past, freedom from Jasper, and ultimately, freedom from herself. And with this Team Rocket-esque punch into oblivion, the age of Malachite is now truly over. That's of course not to say that this fusion won't continue to have an impact, with Lapis bringing it up whenever she's done being comedic relief, and Jasper continuing to fuse for the sake of power to equally beneficial results. But after the ending of Alone at Sea, Lapis and Jasper will never again interact, and I believe that's the only thing that would have made sense coming out of that episode. Sure, I fully get that a quarter hour where Lapis meets the Jasper of future sounds inherently interesting, but I think any story involving these characters giving each other another chance would sort of sully what the fusion has always meant. From the beginning, this fusion was made between two broken gems both trying to take advantage of the other, and everything that's come since has been indicative of this fact. So while I do believe that any hypothetical Steven Universe continuation would have to at least somewhat focus on Jasper, I think Lapis has already had enough Malachite for a lifetime. Anyway, that's about it for me. If you want even more cartoon takes for some reason, you can find me on the Twitter alternative where the skies are blue, but either way, this has been AmpleSamuel, and I'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks for watching.